Risky behavior, where no subject is off limits. Sit back, tune in, and enjoy a beverage with us as we explore controversial issues and answer your health and wellness related concerns, ranging from nutrition and exercise to sex and prescription drugs. I'm here with co-host Dr. Shetha Chakraborty, who's a national media risk expert as seen on CNN, the BBC, Fox News, and more.
But don't just think this hour is all science as usual. After 4 seasons as a regular guest and food scientist on the Dr. Oz Show, Dr. Taylor Wallace, who the Huffington Post calls the nation's premier food and nutrition guru, will help me loosen lips and spill tea with special guests that you won't want to miss. That includes today's episode, so let's jump right in. I am so thrilled to introduce our viewers to Dr. PK Newby. She is a scientist, author, and entrepreneur, and has decades of experience researching diet-related diseases, studying how people make food choices and their impact on the environment, and teaching about why what we eat matters. She also speaks on all things farm to fork. She's the author of Food and Nutrition, What Everyone Needs to Know, which we recommend you check out, but you'll get an interesting sneak peek here today. So, welcome, PK.
Hello. So good to be here with both of you. What a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, let's open it up. I mean, tell us a little bit about your book. I've seen you online, and the book just looks amazing. And, you know, just give us the 10,000-foot view.
Oh, thanks. Absolutely. So this book came out of my many years of research, not just on why what we eat impacts our own body, what people think about when they think about nutrition, right? How what we eat impacts our own health, disease risk, but also how food impacts the environment, how it impacts society, how it impacts the economy. So really, one of my favorite quotes of all time, it's actually on the first page of the book, is by Kurt Vonnegut. So it is basically talking about food in the big picture, and it's, oh my gosh, too much wine. What? My favorite quote ever.
She hasn't drank that much.
Exactly. Yeah, that's before. Yeah, I'm talking about before I got
Give
here.
us 30 minutes.
Okay, I'm talking about before I got here.
It'll come to her after another glass of wine, but that's okay. No, I mean, readers will have
What
an
is wrong with
opportunity.
me?
Readers will have an opportunity to see it for themselves. What we're really excited about having you here in the studio is answering some of the questions that we get frequently. As we kicked off this season, what we hear is, I just don't know. What do I eat? Like, what is the right diet? There's so many fads out there. What do I follow? And Taylor, you know, being a food and nutrition expert, touches upon this, but we haven't yet had the conversation across both food and nutrition experts. So I'm sandwiched between two, so I'm excited.
And by the way, I got to interject. When it comes right down to it, food is practically the whole story every time. You know, or when you get right down to it, food is practically the whole story every time. And I love that. It always resonated with me, and it's changed the whole course of my life. And so I practiced science for many years and studied how what we eat impacts our health, as I was saying, but then really broadened it. And the book came out of teaching about all things food nutrition from farm to fork. So I'm very different from other nutrition people who are kind of just focused on health, or maybe ag people who are just focused on climate. Really, I'm looking for the win-win for everyone, and to broaden people's food literacy just beyond their own health. And I think that's really important.
Well, and so I was really excited for 2 reasons to have you on the show. One, you have a background in research where you look at how food affects chronic disease. So we're very similar in that aspect. But
exactly.
2, how I think we're really similar is you're an academic at heart, and you've went out now, and your whole goal, we were talking about this before the show started, is to really communicate nutrition science to the average consumer. And I really commend you for that, because I've been doing kind of the same thing the last couple of years. And let me tell you, a lot of other researchers love to throw rocks at people like us, but like, there is a real need for strong scientists to be out there in the media.
Oh, absolutely. And exactly why I did leave my full-time academic job, because it became frustrating to know all that we know in the university, and yet people are wondering about what to eat. Right. And, you know, I'm sure we'll get into this, but the fact is there is at least some consensus, you know, about some basic stuff. And guess what? People just don't do it, you know? But it's hard for people to know that when we're so influenced by celebrity nutrition, by what I call single study sensationalism. Like the study du jour that you see flit across your newsfeed may or may not be consensus.
Study du jour, good.
Yeah. So,
Well, so let's talk about that for a minute, because, you know, that's a big big issue. We have people that tweet into the show, about a certain study all the time. You're always hearing about that. Then when the media contact you, this study says X, Y, Z, but it's really about the totality of evidence, and people don't really understand that.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
how can people like you and I, that are researchers by heart, how do we better communicate nutrition science in that aspect? Because the media has sensationalized that one study.
Right?
It's so saturated.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many ways, but one of them is, good storytelling. The onus is upon us. Good storytelling and reaching people where they're at, because just kind of preaching to people and just telling the stats, as many of us know, doesn't work. People need to fit things into their own life, into their own culture and their own tradition. So it just is very important to be cognizant of all that, And so being a good science communicator, obviously. And I think, though, another thing that is science literacy is really important. And we know this is probably getting kind of beyond where we need to be for today's show, but it's really taken a hit, in elementary schools. And you have a lot of people that just kind of don't understand basics about science and the scientific method. And then that makes it hard for them to say, hey, you know what, that is kind of a cool study, just like I do when I see it and say, but you know what, wait, what's the context there?
How can they tell, what should they take seriously versus not?
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone here is kumbaya. I really need to understand what to eat. There is too much intelligence in this room to not get some answers today for our viewers. So I respect so much that you left academia to really communicate, to speak, to get the information out there. So let's kick it off. Let's talk about diets.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's ask your listeners today, or maybe your viewers if you're looking online at the live stream. So what percentage of chronic diseases do you think are preventable through modifiable lifestyle changes? So think about a number to yourself. What percentage? 10? 50? 100? So according to the World Health Organization, 80% of chronic diseases are preventable through modifiable lifestyle changes.
Right.
Like obviously things like exercise and alcohol use and smoking, but diet is the single largest contributing factor. This is according to the World Health Organization, who's looking at consensus.
Right.
Yeah, not that single study du jour, consensus across all of these studies. Now, okay, so then what does that look like? What is that diet? And by the way, chronic diseases, we're really talking about the big ones here: obesity, type 2 diabetes, stroke, okay? And they say, along with the dietary guidelines for Americans and the Canadian Health Plate, that a plant-based diet is the key. And I didn't say vegan, I didn't say vegetarian, I said plant-based. And there's a lot of consensus about that. So that's kind of a two-part to your answer. And I'm sure we'll get into more about it. And there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to plant-based, by the way.
Right. And we were talking before the show, plant-based doesn't necessarily mean vegan or vegetarian, because there are some nutrients that you get from animal-derived foods, namely choline, vitamin B12, bioavailable iron, things like that. But going back, I think you're right. I think what we can agree on is what constitutes a healthy diet is a diet that's high in fruits and vegetables and whole grains.
And exactly. Those
So
are and that's 3/4 of your plate, by the way. If you look at some of the pictographics, whether it's the USDA, which has some issues we don't need to get into, or if you look at the Canadian Health Plate, if you look at Harvard's Healthy Eating Plate, it's 3/4 of the plate is vegetables, fruits, and whole grains that, of course, are minimally processed. So you all know that listening here. We're not talking about a donut. We're talking about whole grains, unrefined. So you're getting all of your nutrients, your fiber, your this, and your that.
Okay, so the food pyramid is accurate, roughly?
Well, the food pyramid is no longer.
Yeah, it's passe.
That's now my plate.
That's so 2005.
For those of you viewers who are interested, you can go to choosemyplate.gov. It has some really good information.
It really
For
does.
those of you who are a little older, like Dr. S over here, that would have been the old food pyramid that went away in 2000.
Yeah, we're all about circles now. Yeah, there's no triangles.
Okay,
it's all about circles.
All right. I like that. No rough edges.
And well, it's better also. It was a really nice evolution, actually, because you see right there, wow, okay, 3/4 of the plate is plants, and that's not even to mention that most people should be eating more plant protein, so more beans, legumes, and things like that. And again, you could still have some animal products for those that so choose. But most people aren't getting enough. And beans and legumes, for example, depending on how you cook them and how they're eaten, both a vegetable as well as a protein source, right?
Well, and they're so good for you because they're
Yeah.
so rich in minerals, which we know minerals like magnesium,
Yep.
we just don't consume enough of
Yeah.
in the American diet.
Yeah,
so
and very important for
I'm very
blood.
pro legume.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
so
Very,
you
very important
can-
for blood sugar control.
You can understand why it's confusing when it's constantly changing and there's just a new, study du jour or a celebrity putting something out there. So let's just like bust some myths, right?
Oh,
that was hard to say.
absolutely.
Why was that so hard
Bust
to say?
myths.
Bust some
Wine.
myths.
What myth do you want to
Okay,
bust?
I want to understand why.
need to be more specific.
Why has paleo, keto, DASH? Why have these diets become so popular and then just reverberate through these echo chambers? Where I know people that swear by them because their friend told them about it
Exactly.
or their uncle. Let's start with paleo. Why is paleo a thing? Is it a thing?
Well, if I could jump in, I will just say, first of all, paleo is based on, paleo is based on what our ancestors might or might not have, consumed 10,000 years ago. Our ancestors only lived to be about 25 years old because they suffered severe vitamin deficiencies and, they got ate by wild animals. I don't know. There's like a whole bunch of reasons that they didn't live to
Right.
be over the
Right,
age
right,
of
right.
30. So I'm not sure we can really compare that to what, a 70-year-old, should eat today for prevention of chronic disease.
And do they even eat meat?
Okay, so here, that's a great place to start. And we could obviously talk the entire rest of the show about just this one myth. But here's the thing, that it's a really interesting example for several reasons. Firstly, the Paleolithic diet actually has a number of different legit researchers who are very, very interested in this, and not just in nutrition, but also in anthropology. I mean, it's really fascinating to think, what did our ancestors eat millions and millions of years ago, right? But part of how it evolved as like the Paleolithic diet is due to something called the evolutionary discordance hypothesis. And since we have a science audience here, I'm just going to say a tiny bit about it, but what does that mean? It means that there's a discord between what we ate then and what we eat now, and is that why we have more chronic disease? But the bottom line is that so much else has changed.
Right.
So you can't attribute it just to, okay, well, we started domesticating grains and animals during, the agricultural revolution. And I talk about all these things in my book. Specifically, the question is, what's the deal with the paleo diet? But you need to understand all this to understand that, yeah, there's some science there, but does that mean you can say that, oh, therefore that's better?
Well, there's some science behind most diets.
Yeah.
I mean,
And also, one last thing I'd want to mention, and this is a really big shock to people, that guess what? We weren't originally hunter-gatherers. We're gatherer-scavengers. That's what we were originally. Okay, so we didn't start hunting until we created tools. That happened like a couple million years after we came down from the trees. So we originally scavenged dead animals when we could, but we mainly gathered fruits, berries, nuts, all those things. And so that's what we did. And then again, of course, early on we did it. But the paleo diet, that being like a plate filled with meat, that really wasn't a thing. And it certainly wasn't filled with bacon.
Right.
And guess what? There was no coffee or alcohol. So people sort of, take these one snippet and go to this major place that is really not even supported.
Well, and we were kind of geeking out at right before the show started, and I was telling you about the paper, the big review we just published on fruit and vegetable intake and all different types of disease risk. But one of the things we found in the paper, if you look, not all fruits and vegetables are created equal.
Yeah,
when
for
it
sure.
comes to the science.
Yeah.
Dark colored berries, citrus fruits, dark green leafy vegetables, cruciferous vegetables. But if you kind of think about it, that's what those scavengers were. They weren't necessarily harvesting wheat out of the field. They were picking blackberries, or they were getting oranges, or
So we're
it was
going full
mostly
circle?
Yeah.
it's mostly vegetables and fruits for sure. No,
Yeah.
we didn't start domesticating grains until 12,000 years ago,
Right.
in the first agricultural revolution. So that is legit to say that, okay, well, again, meaning that's legit that happened, but that doesn't mean therefore that
Right.
they don't have health benefits to offer. And not
Right.
to mention, if we want to fast forward to, let's be real, we're here in the 21st century,
Right.
and there's lots of ways you can create lots of different diets, but we're going to come back to still load it up
Right.
with vegetables and fruits, obviously largely unprocessed. That's going to be
Right.
best
But
for
isn't
you.
there something to be said for living better, living longer, living healthier, and then the changes that have been made over time to get us there? So haven't we learned from earlier diets, and as we progressed, we've gotten smarter and better about it by including in additional sources?
Well, I mean, everything is informed by scientific discovery, innovation, and engineering. So
Right.
that's actually a major theme of my book. And, we were talking a little bit about food processing before. Our food supply is healthier and more plentiful than it's been at any other time throughout
Right.
human history. And we're also healthier. There's also a whole bunch of issues. We also have chronic diseases, and we
Right.
have a huge amount of, let's not even talk about hunger and malnutrition. I mean, we have copious problems when it comes to food nutrition, not to mention climate change and food waste. And again, all these are in my book, and we know about all these things. But yeah, let's not lose sight of the big picture, too, that science and technology have given us incredible tools.
Well, and as that kind of hunter-gatherer, humans have evolved to deal with starvation. We've never
Right.
Evolution has not equipped us to handle over nutrification,
right,
which is
right,
what
right.
you see today with the obesity crisis.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
These are like two sides of the same coin, though. Malnutrition and obesity, right? They're both. They
Well,
can
obesity is a
coexist.
type of malnutrition,
Sort of,
technically.
yeah.
Right.
Obviously, one overnourishment and
Yeah.
one undernourishment, and they
Right.
can at least you can be obese and still be malnourished when it comes to if you're lacking
Right.
certain nutrients. So
And
See,
in
that's
fact, we've
interesting.
shown a
That's
lot in our
counterintuitive
research
for-
that people who
Little
are
bit.
overweight and obese tend to have more micronutrient insufficiencies
Yeah.
and even deficiencies than normal weight people.
because the diet's
Okay.
just not balanced.
So we
Right.
did paleo. Another popular one is keto. Should I just drink whole milk and eat chocolate?
Definitely not. But any more so than we should all just drink all this wine all the time.
Right.
I mean, balance, right? Balance is such a key thing. As much as there's complexity about food and nutrition, obviously
Can we
there's also some
debunk keto?
of
Well-
course. But okay, keto diets, and then we'll definitely jump in. But keto diets have been known to be related to decreasing and managing epilepsy for decades.
Right.
Okay, this is known clinically. We
Right.
know this. How it became a fad diet, you kind of were asking me about it. Like, fuck if I know, man. I mean, I'm a scientist, right? This is not a thing. If you
Right.
talk about nutrition scientists, this is not a thing. And then how this one actually came about, I have no idea. And there are other ones too that's just like
Gwyneth
a carnivore
Paltrow?
diet, just like a dude,
I blame
like
her
being
for
like,
everything.
oh, do this. And it's just like, wait, I'm sorry, what is your background? What is happening here? So it's kind of strange. But by the way, ketosis is a thing. So nutrition is
Right.
biochemistry. So if you get your body into ketosis, yes, you'll burn more fat. But we kind of, human body kind of likes carbs, and so does the brain. So in terms of a sustainable diet,
Right.
so that's kind of my quick take
So
on it.
don't-
What do you think?
Don't expect to have like any smart conversation with somebody on keto. Is
Well,
that
I tell you, I have.
Well, this is a smart conversation.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? This is real biochemistry.
it? No,
but
somebody actually on the
Yeah.
keto diet.
Yeah.
Sure, but I'm saying it's so odd how it's really based in clinical science and then it became
Well,
this thing.
You know what's really funny? My opinion of keto and low carb diets has really, really evolved, particularly over the last year.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, if you're epileptic, absolutely, if you cut off
shown
that
to work.
glucose to the brain and you give it ketones, it can function. And you
Right.
see these kids that have 100 epileptic,
Yeah.
episodes a week go down to like one,
Yeah,
or maybe
for
not
sure.
even that.
It's
So
been
I
shown to
mean,
be effective.
definitely if you're epileptic. When it comes to weight loss, it's really interesting because certain people swear by it.
Yeah.
But Kevin Hall, who's a friend of mine and an excellent researcher out at the National Institutes of Health right outside of D.C., just came out with a clinical study about a year ago where he put, again, it's a small study, it's 17 people, but he did what we call a controlled feeding diet. So he kept them at NIH for several weeks, and for a couple weeks he had these overweight and obese individuals on a high carb diet, and then they had a washout period or a period in between, and then he put them on the ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
And really he found no difference in the amount of weight loss, and so, which was really surprising to me because clinically you see patients that just swear by it. And honestly, like, before I go to the beach on the 4th of July, like, I'll admit it, I've done the fad diet for a month to lose that 5 pounds, honey.
You heard
know,
it
I'm
right
trying.
here from a food scientist.
You heard it
himself.
right here. I'm trying to get a husband, child. Like, hey, I will
And
drop
we're all
that 5
human.
pounds.
We're all human.
Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly what I was going to say, in fact, first of all, a couple things. You can lose weight on any diet. Let's just throw that right out there and be really clear.
There's other confounding factors, right?
You can, well, no, it's just energy balance. You can lose weight. A very clever nutrition scientist, not me, once showed that you could lose weight on the Twinkie diet.
Right.
Just freaking whatever. Right. You just manage your calories.
Right.
So, and there's been a lot of research, clinical trial, as well as observational studies, that the biggest factor that impacts how much weight you lose on a diet is what? What do you guys think that is? Is it carbs? Is it protein? Is it fat? Is it that macronutrient balance? What is it?
Carbs.
No, it's adherence. It's what can you fucking stick to?
Right.
Oh
what
my
can
God.
you stick to?
I've been told carbs are the root of all evil.
No, and then and people were told earlier fat. That's not. We need them all, and so many different balances can work depending on your tradition and culture, and we know that from anthropology,
you know,
and history.
It's
what works.
I argue all the time with Allison Steiber, who's a dear friend of mine. She's chief science officer at the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and she is so pro carb. And I actually think that the carb recommendations are too high because, as nutrition scientists, since like the 60s, we've been saying 45 to 65% of your calories is carbs. Well, that's okay if it's like fruits and vegetables and whole grains. And I don't consider bread a whole grain, you know, even though it has the 100% whole grain thing on it. Like, it also has a bunch of starches and sugar and stuff like that in it.
Depending on the bread.
Yeah. Depending on the brand and the bread. But I think of something like oats as a whole grain.
Yeah,
like
of course.
oatmeal, like whole oats is a whole grain. So I don't know. I just think, you know, I think our dietary guidelines are wrong when they say 50% of your grains is whole grains. I think it should be 100%.
But yeah, well, that is absolutely true. And the Canadian plate
Consensus.
does say, the Canadian plate does have that. So that was just like it sort of encourages other things that I don't want to really get into, but the way it encourages dairy and meat more than I just think it should is because of the influence of lobbies. And that does happen with grains and things like that. And you don't get that as much in other countries. But yeah, it absolutely should be whole grains.
Right.
But the message about
because nobody buys fruits and vegetables, so their lobbies are really poor.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Well, and also, they don't have. Exactly
the truth.
so. Yeah, for
the
sure.
Truth. We promise we would tell the truth.
It's the truth. I've done work for
it's
them.
not as sexy. You know, eat your fruits and vegetables is not as sexy as the latest, like the keto or the bulletproof or the this or the that or the carnivore. Right. It's all trendy, or what Gwyneth Paltrow is doing with the gluten-free.
Right.
Like, you know, no, we actually do have some good answers. But I did want to also make another point, which I think is really important, because really when you look at consensus, depending on, you know, and I like to go to the World Health Organization for a lot of things because it's not just the U.S. perspective, and it's not just, let's say, influenced by the same kind of lobbying that is, say, for example, I just compared it to Canadians' diet plate.
Right.
But the point being that there's actually, and this is from the Institute of Medicine as well, there's a range of macronutrients being fat, carbs, and proteins that are acceptable for a healthy diet, right? And for weight loss diet. So there's still that piece of what's going to work for someone long term. And I do want to return also to the point about the keto diet or whatever diet you can lose weight on and adhere to. 95% of people who go on a diet regain that weight. So it's really nice to lose those few pounds for whatever event. And I hear that, man, totally. You know, we're all human for better and for worse.
But it's like you said, it's adherence, isn't it?
It's adherence, and also not just for getting off that weight, for what is going to work for you for the rest of your life.
Right.
And that Twinkie diet, by the way, it might be good for weight loss, but it's not going to be good for your risk for diabetes.
Well,
right?
I will say one thing about the keto diet, and that is most fad diets, when you go on them, you know, you lower your calorie intake usually, or you restrict certain foods, which we know lowers your metabolism. And then when you go back to your regular diet, your regular metabolism doesn't just bounce back. So you end up gaining more weight than what you end up losing when you stop adhering, to that diet.
Right.
The keto diet works a little bit differently than that from a biochemical standpoint. Because you're consuming the same amount of calories, so your metabolism kind of stays the same.
You're shifting your
so you don't have
oxidation.
that rebound weight as much as you do with other diets. But then there's really not a lot of clinical trials on that that either.
Okay, we are actually at 5 minutes, and which is
wow.
which is kind of shocking, but not shocking given that when
Yeah,
you're talking about
that's
your area of
huge.
expertise, and then there's
Yeah.
2 of you.
Yeah.
Dear God.
And it's
double
practically
trouble.
the whole story every time. Now that I didn't flub it anymore, it really is. It's huge. It's everything. And there's so much to talk about.
Well, I love it because usually when you get 2 researchers in the room, you have like such differing opinions, but we've got some real commonalities in here, and I think that's really important for consumers to hear.
Exactly.
You guys
There's
need
consensus.
to hear where the consensus is
Yeah,
among the experts
exactly.
and not just listen to whatever is popular and trendy in the particular moment. So keep that in mind. I really want to draw both of you to think about, as we kind of round out this episode, what is interesting looking forward. We know the facts about the future. We know that we're increasing in population. We know that the planet is warming. We're working against all of those trends, but the reality is that they're happening. So what does that mean for food production? What does that mean for coming up with a sustainable future where people are fed well? And I know we all have thoughts on this, so...
Oh, gosh. So you want our closing thoughts? And it's a totally different subject, too. But I will say this, and we'll have to leave it, and maybe we can have another conversation about it.
Yeah.
So for me, looking forward and sort of extrapolating from what you said, the future is meatless. And I'm not talking about the future next year or 5 years or 10 years or several decades. 24th century, I'm kind of a sci-fi geek, and I think a lot about the future of food. I don't think we'll be raising animals for food for all kinds of reasons. But right now, we do need them. People in the developing the world need animals, need animal protein, need dairy. And so there's not a one-size-fits-all, and we know that from research as well, that we have first-world problems here and first-world conversations here about food nutrition. We just spent all this time talking about paleo and keto. Oh, hey, by the way, 2 billion people are malnourished.
Right.
Almost 1 billion are hungry.
Right.
So we are having a privileged conversation. But what I'm trying to do, and a lot of people are thinking, how are we going to feed 10 billion people 2050? How are we going to feed people sustainably? How are we going to feed people in space?
Right.
So those are some of the things I think about in general and also in my book. But right now, coming back to, we need all kinds of solutions to make it work for
Right.
people in totally different
Because what we
environments.
care about here is what diet and what trendy thing we should jump on.
Because we have the money to think about it and the privilege and all that stuff.
Right, and I totally agree. I think people in the first world consume, too much meat. I'm guilty of that. Like most people in the U.S. And when you do go to third world countries, though, and you look particularly at growing children, they do need the animal protein. And so, I think there has to be a balance of that for, sustainability, but also to sustain, populations from a nutrition standpoint. It's going to be something that is a huge conversation that I think we frankly have to have as nutrition scientists moving forward. I mean,
for
it's
sure.
critical.
For sure.
Okay, so as much as I want to keep this conversation going, this is really painful to do because I had a whole list of topics that I wanted to pick their brains on, and I'm sorry, viewers, that we're not going to be able to get to it this episode, but I promise, tweet at us if you love the conversation between Taylor and PK and myself, as the person who knew nothing. we will definitely take your opinions into account and have many more episodes on these topics. So tweet at us.
Invite me back.
And yes, absolutely. And you can see all things PK, Dr. PK Newby at pknewby.com.
Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And so,
have ideas for the show? Remember to tweet us at Dr. Taylor Wallace. That's DrTaylorWallace. And at Shetha C. That's SWETAC. Thanks for tuning in to Risky Behavior. Until next time.